I'm hoping AI will lead to tremendous benefits, to tremendous increase in productivity, and to a better life for everybody. I'm convinced that it will do that in healthcare. My worry is that it may also lead to bad things, in particular, when we get things more intelligent than ourselves. No one really knows whether we're going to be able to control them. There are very few examples of more intelligent things being controlled by less intelligent things, which makes you wonder whether when AI gets smarter than us, it's going to take over control.
I don't think I compare or even feel in comparison to Geoffrey Hinton, but I'd say my views align more with Jan LeCun than Geoffrey Hinton in terms of AI's potential for danger. Yes, it could be misused, but so can any other tool. But I don't think it'll ever, at least we're not even close to it taking over the world or whatever the whole doomerism movement is about. You could say the same thing about electricity. When electricity was first invented, being used in different cities, people were publishing papers about electricity killing off people. So I think it's the same kind of instinctual fear you get to any novel technology.
And welcome back to another episode of the 100-Year Podcast. My name is Adario Strange, and this week we have with us someone who is, I would say, leading the bleeding edge research regarding the intersection of artificial intelligence and medicine, Dr. Cyril Zakka. How are you doing?
Doing well. How are you? Thank you for the wonderful intro. I think it's a bit of an exaggeration, but thank you anyway.
Well, I've looked into some of your research and kind of like your musings and some of your experiments. I don't think it's exaggeration at all. We should mention that I guess beginning in 2022, you became a fellow at Stanford's medical school, working on the intersection of artificial intelligence and I guess cardiac research, a couple of other areas, and you'll kind of I guess flesh that out for us. But you came to my attention, I guess in August when you joined Hugging Face, which is one of the giants in artificial intelligence. And I think your role is specifically dedicated to investigating, researching, and I guess helping with the, I guess, technical and medical heavy lifting on the intersection between medicine and artificial intelligence. So before we get to that, can you just, let's rewind a bit. Take us into your background, how you started, because my understanding from my research is that you're not like the typical doctor. You're a medical doctor, by the way. We've had a bunch of PhDs on this program, but I think you're the first actual medical doctor. But you're unique in that you started coding as a child. Is that right?
Correct. I was lucky enough that I kind of saw my dad coding throughout my life. So I was very impressionable from a young age. I kind of wanted to do the same thing he was doing at the time. So I kind of asked him how he got into it. He showed me a few resources, and that's when I started doing my own thing. I didn't really deeply get into it until I'd say I got into the jailbreak scene. So when the first iPod Touch came out, that's when I started messing with jailbreaking CityF Weeks, making my own, selling them, etc. That eventually led to iOS development, released a few apps, and that naturally led to machine learning, actually. And then going into medicine felt like a natural synergy between those two fields. And that kind of led to the position I am in today.
And I mean, have you encountered many doctors, like medical doctors, who have a similar background? Because it just feels like that's such a unique, I guess, start, but maybe it's more common than I know.
It's not as common as you would think, even though I think that programming is more of a tool that should be integrated in medical education. It's not as common as you think. I do know a few people that have very deep skills, very great skills in programming, and they're also medical doctors. Off the top of my head, I don't know if you've heard of him, Dr. Graham Walker at UCSF. Sorry, he's at Kaiser now. He actually created an app when he was still in medical school called MD Calc, which is a bunch of medical calculators that physicians use worldwide on an app on a website. So he's someone that I look up to as well. There are a couple folks at Stanford who are also in the same boat. I think we all congregate in the same spaces. And a few people across the United States.
By the way, MIT, has kind of like this reputation of, I guess, innovation across disciplines. Was there any, did you flirt with MIT at all in terms of like becoming a fellow there or doing any research there?
Never really came up. I think the way I got my fellowship at Stanford is very non-traditional. So just to give you a little background, so during medical school, I was doing a lot of experiments with Swift, machine learning. Swift UI had just come out. And then this up-and-coming company called Hugging Face, one of the people there, Julien Chaumont, the CTO now, actually noticed my work. So that's the first time he reached out. And he was like, hey, we love what you do, or we're starting a company. I forget what the exact details were, but hey, we'd love for you to join the company. I was like, I'm going through medical school, but let's keep in touch. And then, so he kept on retweeting my work, kind of increasing the visibility of it until I released something that was pretty cool at the time. And that's when that caught the attention of a postdoc at Stanford who was working in the cardiothoracic surgery lab that I then joined. His name was Rohan Shad. He's now a cardiothoracic resident at UPenn. Great guy. So I technically owe my fellowship as well to Hugging Face for kind of increasing the visibility of my work and it being seen by some great folks at Stanford.
Now, speaking of, you just mentioned an Ivy League school, and we talked about MIT, which I guess is Ivy League adjacent. They do a lot of work with Harvard. For someone, let's say a young person out there looking at you as kind of like an example, as a beacon, take us through your schooling. Like, where did you actually do undergrad? Where did you do grad? Like, where are you from academically?
So that's a bit of a long story. So I was born in Lebanon, did some schooling there, moved around a lot. So also did some schooling actually in West Virginia. I think I did the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade there. Did some high school there. That came back to Lebanon. Went to college at Boston College, which you wouldn't think of as like a tech university, but I majored in biology actually. Then went to medical school in Lebanon. Did my 4 years there, and then joined Stanford 2 years later, or for 2 years.
And that's, I feel like I remember the American University in Beirut. Is that?
The American University of Beirut.
Okay. And they're associated with Brown. Is that the connection, or?
No, they're their own thing. But they're headquartered, I think officially the board is headquartered in New York. It's an American institution on paper. The president throughout the university's history has always been an American citizen. Kind of a morbid story is one of the presidents was actually there's a basketball coach I think called something Kerr, Stephen Kerr. His dad was actually the president of the American University of Beirut in the 70s or 80s. And
that's right. Yeah, Steve Kerr from the Warriors. Right. Okay. Well, so now take me, I guess, into how you married your early interest in biology and I guess which evolved into medicine. How did that, I guess, come back full circle to your interest in coding?
You kind of connect the dots looking backward, not forwards. So throughout my life, I was just doing what I thought was interesting, what I loved. So I started out with programming. Then I told you I went to iOS development. At the time, I was creating a keyboard, so an iOS keyboard. Apple didn't give you access to the API for next word prediction. So I Googled around and found this thing called machine learning. I was like, hey, I'll create my own next word prediction engine. So started with that. Took a few.
What year was this?
Maybe 2015, 2016, around that time. So around the second year of college was when I was building that app. And then learned about this thing called machine learning. So there were a few Coursera courses from Stanford, I think, on machine learning. So did those fully online. And then I just decided, hey, I want to do this project. That's basically how I've learned programming throughout my life. Just take a project, work through it. No matter if I don't know anything, I'll just Google around, find the solution, and just see it through. So kind of picked my own project at the time, which was tuberculosis detection in chest x-rays. There were a bunch of data sets floating online. Thought I'd give it a shot. And that's how basically I acquired some skills in machine learning, then spent some time on Kaggle, participating in competitions. Never really won any. I was still a novice, but it's where I learned a lot of different techniques and approaches that you wouldn't necessarily read about in the literature. And then in college, I kind of continued doing this thing. And then in my final year of college, I was kind of hesitating between a PhD in computer science and maybe doing medical school. So I had my mentor in one of my genomics class. He's like, hey, what you're doing is great. It's the future of medicine. But if you don't do medical school now, you're not going to do it later on and having an MD in your hand is going to open a lot more doors than a PhD for what you want to do. And you can always do a PhD later on, but to have the patients to actually go through medical school, the rounds, the like seeing patients, etc., the calls, is that you're not going to do that later on. Don't kid yourself. So if you want to do it now, and that's going to open a lot more doors than a CS and PhD will if you're trying to do AI in medicine. And he was entirely right. So applied late for medical school because I really wasn't sure about what I was going to do. My parents were in Lebanon. My sister was already in medical school in Lebanon, so went there. Had a great time. And I was lucky enough that the American University of Beirut kind of supported my research in artificial intelligence. And I also have to mention that Hugging Face was a big help in this. So I think it was during my second or third year of medical school, I approached Julien at Hugging Face. I was like, hey, I want to open an AI center at the American University of Beirut. I think there's a lot of potential for AI in medicine. We don't have the necessary resources to do that, but there's a lot of excitement. Well, let's do this. He's like, sure, here's some money, no strings attached, go do what you do. So I approached the deans at the medical school, the president of the American University of Beirut, and we created the Center for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, which was the first integrated AI in medicine program, I think, in the Middle East, which was super interesting. We bought the necessary GPUs, and that's how we started AIM at AUBMC. So I briefly served as program director until I graduated. And then I haven't really kept in touch with them just because I've been really busy with a bunch of work and the time difference doesn't help. But it's still a working program. Different people go and do AI research there, integrate with hospital data. It's, I think, a very interesting experiment.
You mentioned Stanford and Coursera. And I wonder about this idea, and I think MIT has been one of the pioneers in this in terms of offering courses online. There are a number of institutions, even back, a lot of people don't know this, but the science fiction author H.G. Wells actually earned his bachelor's degree through distance learning. I think it was at the University of London. This is back in the 1800s, I think. And there's this kind of like burgeoning space of just online education, in which you obviously took at least, partial, advantage of. What do you think about that space in general as someone who is highly educated and you've gone through the rigors of academia? Do you think it's a meaningful part of education in the future? What do you think about it with regard to affordability? Like one of the big hurdles for education for someone who is brilliant, a young child who is brilliant and has a deep interest in a particular area, they don't want to go into $200,000, debt, for life, but, and they don't have a wealthy family. So, I mean, do you see kind of like an opportunity there in the future?
Of course. I think we're lucky enough that we live in an age where everyone can have access to this type of education. I think the only thing you need is time and maybe a laptop, depending on what you're trying to get into. But I think as long as there's interest and there's drive, you can likely achieve whatever it is you want in this day and age with these courses. More specifically in computer science, I think it's one of the, I don't want to say few, it's one of the most common fields where you can achieve mastery without necessarily getting a degree. And I think there are a lot of great computer scientists that don't have an official degree in computer science. I can think of a bunch of people at Hugging Face that are in a similar boat. And you can kind of see that where on Twitter, I don't know if you're on Twitter, where there's a bunch of accounts from undergrads or people who are in related fields who bring novel ideas to AI or machine learning that aren't necessarily in the field, that don't have a formal education in the field. And I think that's what makes kind of the internet and sharing knowledge and online courses, online forums, et cetera, kind of invaluable to our day and age.
There's this fun tool online. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. It's something along the lines of, we'll try to show it on the screen. It's something on the lines of, will a robot take your job, or takemyjob.com, something like that. And, so you can put in, do you want to be a carpenter? Do you want to be, a doctor, a lawyer, a marketing specialist? And it will kind of give you based on, and it actually uses kind of research and studies to provide an answer. And what's interesting is that, there are some fields that are like, very low risk, you can go ahead and invest in this area. very high risk. This area looks like it's about to be eliminated. I think one of the ones I remember was postal workers. It was just like high, don't go here. It's about to get eliminated. But when it came to, I guess, computer scientists, the meter was right in the middle, indicating that there is kind of like some, I guess, vagary around what the future of computer science is for humans with regard to these tools, specifically meaning AI. And I guess I bring that up to just say, many people are speaking of the future of AI where you have humans working in tandem with AI. But like once we get to a certain point with those models, and I guess we'll talk about, the broader implications of this later. But once you get to a certain point, I mean, do you feel like, do you think there's a long road ahead for computer scientists as a career? For someone who's 10 years old right now, maybe watching this and thinking about a career in computer science?
Yeah, definitely. I can even give you an example in medicine. So when neural networks first started booming in the current spring of AI, Geoffrey Hinton actually said that radiologists will be replaced within 5 years. I think we're about 7 or 10 years later, and radiologists are still very much in demand, very well paid, are still driving their own cars to work. We still don't have self-driving cars. And I think it's the same thing with computer scientists. There's always going to be work to be done. AI, as it's, some people disagree with me, but AI in its current form is incapable of real reasoning. It's just mimicking the process. And you can kind of see that if you spend more than 30 minutes, an hour with it. So there's more work to be done. Computer scientists are going to be replaced in the near future. And I'm willing to place a bet on that. And in most fields, actually, you have to remember these models are trained on internet data. So while there are some gems on the internet, most data is, I'd say, average. So the internet the resulting model will have an average performance. So folks who have incredible mastery in a certain niche area, or who are really skilled at a specific thing, I don't think AI will replace them. For the middle folks who are still getting started or still in the middle of their career, I think AI will boost them, but not necessarily replace them. And in the case of people who are just getting started, I think it's a way for them to climb the ladder quicker than the people that came before them. So
this
helps folks.
This reminds me of one of your tweets where you were referencing, I think, another doctor who was saying, hey, anyone considering, a career in medicine, beware, because, the future is, I guess, robotic surgery and AI, and you kind of push back on that online. This kind of makes me, I guess, move down the path of what is the specific role of doctors in the future, in your view, in terms of things like robotic surgery. You now have, I've seen situations where a surgery is happening on one coast and it's being supervised by a physician on another coast, and the actual physical interactions are happening via robotic, I guess, hands or instruments. Can you kind of give us kind of like a preview as to what you're seeing and what you think will happen in the next 15 years in that area?
Yeah, so the whole robotic thing is pretty interesting because we've had, I think, robotic surgery since at least the early 2000s. It was actually started out from DARPA, branched off as a different company. We had Intuitive Surgical. Their patent just expired, and now different companies are starting out their own robotic surgery robots. And the cool thing about that is for the patient, you're spending less time in the hospital. The incision site is pretty tiny. So lots of benefits, but it also comes at a cost. It's usually a more costly procedure. There's more of a learning curve for the surgeon, physician. So those are the benefits of robotic surgery by themselves. With telesurgery, where you have someone supervising a surgery from a different country, from a different room, etc., that's helpful if the surgeon themselves that's performing the procedure doesn't have necessarily the expertise or the knowledge or know-how to do a certain surgery. I'm not sure it's being used that commonly yet, as far as I know. You're still, like, most robotic surgeries happen where the surgeon's in the same room controlling the robot from the console. That's mostly, I think, been used to kind of tout the benefits of 5G, but if I'm not mistaken, but don't quote me on this. But the way I see the whole field progressing with AI and doctors and the whole interplay is, at least in surgery, it's going to be a co-pilot that kind of warns the surgeon of, hey, stay away from this area, or hey, don't cut this area. There's an artery there. So there's a cool paper from Dan Hashimoto at UPenn. They trained a neural network called Go No Go that highlights like go zones and no go zones inside of a surgical field to kind of minimize adverse effects. I don't think we're getting to the point where we're doing fully automated surgical procedures just yet, at least in the next 10, 15, maybe 20 years. I'd say that's mostly a data issue. There's a lot of data out there, but that data is siloed at different hospitals that aren't necessarily willing to share that data. And for clinical medicine, similar deal. I think it'll mostly take care of the paperwork for physicians. So I'm like, when physicians see patients, they're excited about the physician. They wouldn't be doing this if they weren't. They're excited about the patient-physician interaction. What they don't like is having to stare at a computer either during the interaction or after and kind of document the entire thing. If you're a resident, you're seeing 20, 30 patients, you have to sit down after the whole round, then place the orders yourself, write the notes yourself, contact the different specialists yourself. It's all kind of, I wouldn't say grunt work. It's time consuming. So it'd be nice to have an AI model take care of at least drafting these orders, drafting these notes, you making corrections, submitting them, and then just enjoying the time with your patient. And I think that's where a lot of current AI work's being done. You have these different scribing companies that are taking care of the patient interaction documentation. We recently released a paper that takes care of, or that addresses, autonomously placing orders, retrieving patient information from an EHR system, and even retrieving guidelines from sources that physicians already use, like UpToDate, PubMed, etc. So I think that's where the field's moving towards. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we're replacing doctors. Those the people that are claiming these things, I think, are not making any serious claims. But that's just my opinion.
You talk about doctor-patient interaction in concert with AI. And I'm curious about the topic of bias. There have been a number of studies that have talked about patient bias, communities of color, in terms of, well, this patient may be in pain, but is it necessarily recognized versus this, let's say, this one pregnant woman versus another pregnant woman, infant mortality rates, across demographics. And I'm wondering, as we look at AI and, and machine learning and I guess face recognition, some of these same topics seem to be coming up, meaning, people look at AI and I guess the presumption from many non-AI engineers is that, well, this is just data. This is clean. This is the cleanest way we can look at anything, not realizing that a lot of the data is culled from humans, from our human experiences and what we've actually shared. And so some of those inherent biases may be embedded in some of the models. So I guess what I'm asking you is, moving forward in the field of medicine, like, are you seeing that as a potential danger? And do you think AI, I guess, would be able to remedy some of the inherent bias that at least we've seen some reports of in medicine?
That's I say, like, very interesting question. If you look at medicine, AI, with or without AI, in the past, medicine hasn't really been kind to some marginalized populations. And that's reflected in data and some calculators that are used in medicine that are slowly being phased out. And since the AI models are being trained on this data, or being trained on internet scale data, and then being applied to the medical field, those biases are going to be present. And there are several studies that have shown that these, like, ChatGPT is biased towards certain populations or against certain populations. There was this very interesting work from Dr. Roxana Dineshu at Stanford that showed that with ChatGPT when it first came out. So I think biases are always going to be there. You can, as long as you're aware of them and you make an effort to actually explore how the model is making its decisions, I'm forgetting the word, what features it's looking at in order to make a recommendation, or make work towards explainable AI models. I think it's okay to use these models as long as there's a human there saying, hey, like, this isn't right, we should be doing this instead. So always having a human in the loop. There is a lot of work being done in mitigating these biases, and I'm 100% for them. But in the meantime, if the AI model is able to be used in order to save lives, and someone's there to be like, hey, this isn't right, let's do this instead, I think we should definitely make use of these models.
Do you envision a future? Yeah, again, I always love to go to science fiction as kind of like speculative examples of what may happen. I don't know, let's just take law enforcement and like a very crude B movie like RoboCop. And, the idea that, well, the data says this, and we do have a human hand involved, but the human is, the, I guess, bureaucrat or, government worker is relying on the data. And often, even now, that AI is still kind of nascent and isn't fully integrated in a lot of municipal systems. You'll have a government worker say something like, well, the data says this, and based on my experience, this doesn't seem that wrong, so let's go forward. I mean, from your perspective, you've seen so many things, from the technology side to the medical side. I mean, how can we guard against that reality where a patient comes in and the doctor, who is very experienced and has their human empathies, nevertheless says something like, well, the data says this and this doesn't seem that wrong, so let's move it along.
Well, humans are always biased against different things. So the bias is always going to be there, like you say, and they're going to rely on the data. They might make a decision that's not informed based on the data, but that's exactly it, because they're misinformed or not informed enough. And I think that's something that needs to be remedied by when you present an AI model to a physician. You're like, hey, this can go badly this way, or this actually only does this, so only use it for this specific use case. And that's why different companies like Hugging Face mainly has released or has pioneered the whole AI model card, where you're like, okay, we train this model on this data set. These biases are going to be present. Just, hey, a heads up, don't use it in these specific cases. I think that we should create model cards specifically for medical models, where we're like, hey, this was trained on this data, where historically it has been biased against these people. So just a heads up, don't use it. So it's all about information and democratizing knowledge and informing people like, hey, these AI models aren't perfect. They're just manipulating data in a certain direction. Keep that in mind while you make your decision. So it's all about informing the end user.
And so the end user being that, I guess, government
Physician.
worker, physician, and in some cases, government worker. I mean, are you one of the people who will be educating these people? Because I'm just wondering, like, where do they get that guidance where they don't just default to the machines? Like, where's that? Where do you think that guidance? I mean, I'm asking you to speculate. I know you're a scientist and a doctor, and so you operate on data and facts, but I'm asking you to speculate. Where do you think that kind of training and nuanced approach will come from in the future?
For medicine, it'll come from medical education. There's a lot of efforts right now trying to embed AI into medical education and kind of inform physicians about the dangers of relying on these tools. I was at a conference recently giving a talk, and right before me, there was this person that was kind of saying that AI is going to lead to the world's doom. Her husband was a physician, which kind of frightened a bunch of physicians in the audience, and they're like, hey, it's going to replace our jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So when I presented, I actually walked them through creating a model just like ChatGPT, starting from GPT-2 all the way to ChatGPT-4. So even showing them the different outputs, how the model sees data. And by the end of the talk, everyone was kind of relatively calm. I got taken aside. People were asking a lot of questions about if this model operates this way, how does it actually understand? And then I walked through them about there's no actual understanding, it's pattern matching, et cetera. So just going to different talks, conferences, embedding this knowledge about how these tools are created within medical education. Even in there, like you see a lot of medical conferences now that have AI sections or AI works. So that's where, and a lot of physicians at least convene at these conferences. So I think that's where you could disseminate this type of information. As the health lead at Hugging Face, it's also my job to kind of educate physicians, tweet about papers that are actually using AI in a correct way, quote unquote, or actually making AI useful in medicine versus trying to replace physicians. So that's what I've been trying to do, increasing the visibility of these works. In other fields, I think that mostly stems from policymakers having the correct advisors. So I know a lot of AI companies are lobbying in DC to pass certain laws. I think people like Yamdo Kuhn or Meta should also be lobbying towards open source and open sourcing tools because that leads to knowledge dissemination and people knowing about these tools and making informed decision versus more closed solutions, trying to guard their secret and just sell people technology and try to make money off of them without explicitly telling them this is how we make this, watch out, etc.
Yeah, and it seems like, or at least on its face, it seems like one of the good actors in that respect is Meta and their embrace of open source AI, which makes me think about something with regard to AI in medicine, which is their Project Galactica, which apparently they released. And then I guess and this was a tool that I guess was meant to be kind of like an AI-powered medical assistant in terms of like accessing many papers and research studies. And within 48 hours, it was taken down. And I think the reason was, and maybe you could educate me on this, I think the reason was because it was hallucinating and giving incorrect answers and was viewed as potentially dangerous. And so they quickly removed it. What's the mistake you think they made with Galactica, if you think they made a mistake?
I think they were a little too early. I don't think they made a mistake at all. I think it was very noble of them to release that paper, that model. They even said that this would happen. There might have been a miscommunication issue. Maybe that led to this whole drama and people using it for actual research without knowing that it would hallucinate references. But I definitely think it was the right decision to actually release that model. And I do think they actually released the second model, if I'm not mistaken, afterwards with the right information being put out there. But by no means did they make a mistake by releasing that model or the paper or anything like that, in my opinion.
And when you talk about using AI to help a physician, let's say, read an X-ray or, some other medical scan, like I'm mostly acquainted with the idea of hallucinating via text or graphics. Does this happen in the area of medical analysis using AI, and how's that come up?
Yeah, of course. So there's this recent wave of vision language models, which kind of operate in the same way as these text transformers that you're used to. So you tokenize an image, break it up into a grid of different patches, feed it into the transformer. So what you're seeing is the model will be referencing stuff that don't exist in these patches in a similar way it hallucinates in text. And that's always going to happen with, at least in my opinion, always going to happen with an autoregressive architecture. So I don't think it's necessarily that much different from text. You're always going to get hallucinations with these types of architectures, either because the model is undertrained, not it's because of the architecture itself. That's still a research question under study, but it is present in imaging for sure.
Now, this is maybe a sensitive question for you because I know you kind of push back on the notion of jobs being eliminated. But within the realm of medicine, can you think of at least one role that you think might be, I guess, made obsolete in the next, 15 years due to AI? Even if it's a minor role, some kind of, side kind of small role.
Not really. Everyone at the hospital has a specific role that that they undertake, and that role is usually vital to the whole hospital working, from the physician to the chief to the nurse to the internist. Everyone has a dedicated role. I think maybe you could talk about decreasing the number of folks employed at a hospital, maybe because you could have, instead of you could have a resident plus an AI model take on 40 patients instead of 2 residents, for example. Don't quote me on this. But I don't think there's a role that's going to be necessarily fully eliminated. Just a whole staffing maybe issue.
Okay. And do you... Yeah, I've been doing a lot of, deep diving on education and AI. And this is a question I ask often, but because you're so educated and you've been to, so many different institutions or been involved with so many different institutions, I'm curious, do you think, I know that there are ethics statements within universities now. Do not use AI. If we find that in any way you're using AI, you'll be failed or you'll be expelled from this class, so on and so forth. but we still don't really have like a reliable method to detect AI generated text, ideas, that kind of thing. So it seems to me almost certain that right now in some universities, there is a small percentage of people passing classes and moving towards a degree in whatever concentration using AI. Do you think we're at any danger of, or in any danger of people passing these courses, putting together, academic papers using AI and exiting with a degree in something they didn't actually earn and they're not actually versed in the concentration?
I just want to start out by saying that I don't think using AI at university, whether it's to write a paper, et cetera, is necessarily wrong. It's a tool like any other. Growing up in the age of the internet, Wikipedia, I remember a professor would be like, hey, don't use Wikipedia for a research paper. It's not legit, no references, people make stuff up. But funnily enough, most of these tools are trained on Wikipedia and more. So I think it's how you use these tools. And second disclaimer, I don't think people using these tools are necessarily cheating. But I want to say people throughout throughout education in general will cheat if they want to. And that has happened throughout the history of education. And they have obtained, you could say that they obtained their degrees without necessarily mastering the material, just by cheating, relying on other people's work, etc. So that danger has always been there. People are going to rely on shortcuts to get things done. I don't think this is an AI specific problem. It's just more about how much effort you want to put into learning something and actually mastering the field you're graduating in. That's more of a person-specific issue or condition, environment-specific issue more so than an AI-specific issue.
Gotcha. Yeah, ethics. It makes me think about the Harvard case. I won't name the person, but one of their recent presidents stepped down, and one of the allegations was related to plagiarism in her dissertation to get her PhD. But upon further review, at least some people opined that the alleged plagiarized parts were boilerplate language rather than the wholesale taking of ideas. And I'm just curious, particularly with AI, it seems like, okay, so if, let's say before the rise of commercial AI, someone did something like that and they took boilerplate language, put it in their dissertation, and it was considered a form of plagiarism, but not necessarily the wholesale stealing of an idea. It seems to me that we're definitely at risk of people using AI to basically construct boilerplate language that isn't their own, and, using it to create thesis papers, to earn a master's or, a dissertation for a PhD. I mean, do you think, would your, I guess, perspective on that change in that case, or is it the same?
It's the same. Mistakes can be made early on in your career that can later be caught and people can make a scandal out of it. But like I said, it's more so a reflection of the person, their ethics, the environment that they're in, the conditions that they're in, more so than them, hey, like, I'm going to use AI to cheat and get my degree and get out of here. It's more person specific, I say, more complicated than just saying, hey, AI is facilitating people graduating without degrees.
Gotcha. So talk to me about Hugging Face. Like, why did they bring you on? Why is it important? Like, so many of these companies, these giant AI companies, they seem to be focused on everything from, text generation, video, imagery, analysis of data. But you don't hear a lot about these large companies. I mean, you hear some, but you don't hear a ton about them bringing in people from the medical area. What is it that you're doing at Hugging Face, and what's the mission? What's the goal?
So firstly, I think there are a lot of companies working in healthcare, including all the big tech companies, even hiring doctors. So you have Alan, who's a vascular surgeon, being consulted at Google, working at Google and Google's health department. You have Matt Lundgren at Microsoft leading their health department right now. He's a radiologist. At Apple, you have several physicians also working with a lot of the health features and a lot of health features in your wearables. So heart rate, sleep detection, etc. All those are being done with studies that are being done at universities, hospitals, etc. So I think everyone has their own their physicians to rely on, or their health tech folks. I think what we're doing differently at Hugging Face is kind of open sourcing and democratizing state-of-the-art machine learning in healthcare without necessarily overhyping things. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're just trying to build tools for you to use to benefit whatever your end goal is. So in the case of the healthcare team, which I lead, it's basically building tools to facilitate research. So let's say you're playing around with EHR data at the hospital. You can't necessarily use ChatGPT to extract information from the EHR. You have to manually review and highlight different information, extract it, put it on in a separate CSV. But what we do now is we optimize an LLM to run directly on your MacBook. So you could basically run that model completely offline, completely privately, and speed up your workflow. Similarly, for surgical data and surgical AI, we optimize SAM2 from Meta to run entirely on your MacBook. So you could one click segment different structures inside of a surgical procedure to train your AI model for autonomous surgery. We're also building a tool to serve AI models without relying on a third party. So we're open sourcing actually Hugging Face Chat Mac. I don't know if you see it, the Mac app for the HF chat, which you're able to specify an endpoint, and you're able to serve or receive information from a model that's deployed at your own hospital. So we're basically empowering institutions, physicians, healthcare workers, clinicians to actually build their own tools, or give them the tools themselves that they can build upon to kind of build their own models without necessarily giving away their data, giving away what they have as valuable, and not necessarily getting anything back in return.
You mentioned SAM2, and during my research, I found SAM2 Studio, which I believe you developed with a few other partners. What's the acronym? What's SAM stand for? I think it's all there. There's also something in there called free, and I think that's an acronym for something. Can you explain what that means and what it does, what that app does?
So SAM is a segment anything model from Meta. So what was cool about their entire work is they created a pipeline to create what you can call synthetic data, where they're able to place a bunch of different points inside of an image, and then extract the different structures. So you're able to segment anything without having costly labels. So you're able to place a point and it segments the structure automatically. You can refine that segmentation or enlarge it, etc. But you traditionally needed a GPU or expensive hardware to run it at scale. So what we did is we optimized SAM2 for Core ML for your M chip on your Mac. So it runs completely optimized, low memory. You're able to load it in an app. We also build the tools for you to actually visualize the segmentations that you click on, actually sort through the segmentations, export them, which is what you traditionally need in a typical pipeline. It's very bare bones, but that's the point. We're showing you how to do things. So in case you want to build something specific for your application, you can just build on top of things instead of doing things from scratch. And at Hugging Face, we collaborate with Meta, we collaborate with Google. We have a lot of collaborations even with Apple. We have a lot of collaborations with different companies where we optimize different models for their specific hardware to facilitate the ability of users to actually make use of these models and actually build on top of them, which benefits everyone, I think.
Yeah, and I misspoke. It wasn't free. It's called FAIR, and it's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. That's, I guess, one of the sources you drew from to help develop SAM2, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned synthetic data, and I think, in the discussions coming from Meta, they are increasingly mentioning synthetic data, which I think is important because, there is ultimately a limit to how much actual data there is to collect. Aside from legal considerations and copyright and the war that is happening and will continue to happen over that, let's just say, hypothetically, all data, all human data was able to be, hoovered up into one, model. That's finite, So synthetic data, I mean, I saw your face, so maybe you disagree, but it seems like synthetic data might be the answer. But I do have some concerns as to what results will come out of synthetic data. What's your view on that?
So it's a very, I think, a relevant question. There's a lot of conflicting papers coming out recently in the literature that's saying, hey, synthetic data is going to lead to your model collapsing, or hey, synthetic data actually helps your model generalize. So I don't think there's a clear answer to that just yet. But at least in medicine, there's a group at Stanford Akshay Chowdhury. He's a PhD assistant professor. He showed that actually at a small scale, I might be misremembering this, but at small scale, synthetic data actually helps. But when you're actually scaling up, there are no clear benefits to using synthetic data. But of course, other groups have shown different things. I think synthetic data has its place in training these models, specifically referring to at least imaging models. Let's say you're a hospital, you want to share data with a different hospital. One way you could do this is train a synthetic model that approximates your own data set and then share that model or share the outputs with a researcher or whatever, without necessarily giving away your patient's data. So it could, I think, open up a few doors in that direction. But I don't necessarily agree that data being generated is finite. I mean, take a look at the hospitals. They're generating terabytes and terabytes of data every single year. So at least in the medical field, I don't think that's the case. So that's basically my answer. I don't think
so. So new research generates new data that can be used to train. I get you. I think maybe that was my blind spot, not thinking about that. I'm curious about something. My training is primarily as a journalist, and I'm curious about your perspective on this. Many journalists, when they cover technology, whether it's apps, hardware, that kind of thing, some of them have some grounding in coding, or education. Many of them come to it raw and they learn as they move along. AI seems, at least from my vantage point as a longtime tech reporter, it's kind of like a next level up. And it has forced me personally to read many academic papers and rediscover my academia, research paper muscles and looking at, bibliographies and notes and parsing through a person's research and kind of like comparing notes between different papers. I'm curious, when are you frustrated as someone in this industry now, when you see, I guess, mainstream media covering AI? Are you frustrated by the coverage in terms of the lack sometimes of rigor with regard to the academic approach, or do you think they're mostly getting it right?
That's also a difficult question. I think it depends on the journalists themselves. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the exposure. I think it's mostly on the person being interviewed, for example, to kind of clarify a few things. So I've been interviewed for publications at different times. I do spot some errors, which I make a point to clarify to the person interviewing me. So I guess it's a shared responsibility for the interviewer and interviewee to kind of share that responsibility of what am I sharing with the world and not making bold claims. I'm not necessarily I'm pretty excited about people actually getting into the field. I feel like it makes things very digestible to the common folk. So 5 years ago, people would ask me, like, why are you doing AI or machine learning in medicine or even computer science in medicine? There's no intersection there. What are you doing? But now you see that everyone has at least an interest in AI, saying they're doing AI in surgical education, in medicine, etc. So I think there's a lot of benefit to journalists covering the works of different folks, I think, is my final answer.
Okay. So, and here's the final question. And this is, I guess, related to some degree with regard to kind of perspectives and attitudes on AI, which is the recent win by Geoffrey Hinton.
Still slightly in shock. I got a phone call at 1:00 in the morning in California. I thought about whether I should answer it or not. And luckily, I decided I would see who was calling. And I was extremely surprised to get the Nobel Prize in physics. I never expected that. I think of the prize as a recognition of a large community of people who worked on neural networks for many years before they worked really well.
So often called godfather of AI, who recently, in a very, I guess, flashy way, exited Google and the DeepMind project over what he believed were fears related to, I guess, the dangerous applications of AI and what they were building. And the Nobel Prize he won, I think it was in partnership with one other person. It was for physics. It wasn't specifically for AI. And my understanding, loosely, is that it speaks to, I guess, the back propagation method used in neural networks, which has some physics underpinnings. And so that's why, they kind of justified the physics aspect of the win. But when he was interviewed, right after the win, he said he felt, this is his view, that at least part of the win was related to him sounding alarm bells about AI and the potential dangers of AI. He is obviously one of the loudest, most prominent, I guess, most credentialed voices to say something like this. I have never heard him say anything like the Terminator, from the movies is coming or anything like that. But, a lot of the stuff he says is somewhat adjacent in terms of broad fears. I'm curious what you think about Hinton's viewpoint and also the fact that he won a Nobel. I mean, the most high-profile Nobel for an AI engineer or scientist is now the guy leading the charge on, hey, this stuff could be dangerous.
I don't think I compare or even pale in comparison to Geoffrey Hinton. So I don't think my opinion on the whole thing matters. But I'd say my views align more with Jan LeCun than Geoffrey Hinton in terms of AI's potential for danger. Yes, it could be misused, but so can any other tool. But I don't think it'll ever, at least we're not even close to it taking over the world or whatever the whole doomerism movement is about. And you can kind of see that being reflected in the country right now with different companies. So OpenAI is pivoting from a research lab to a product lab because you're coming to realize that at the end of the day, they just want to sell you a product. So whatever they say to sell you the product is what you're going to hear on the news. So I'm happy that he won the Nobel Prize. I think it is justified. I mean, AI is enabling discoveries in all types of fields. It so happens that he won the prize in physics, but I don't see why that couldn't have been the case in any other field, because he built a tool that he, in conjunction with other folks, built tools that is revolutionizing industries right now. So I feel completely fine with him winning, and I'm happy for him. I watched some of his lectures. He's a great guy.
But let's speak to, again, last question, I guess, the fears about superintelligence and how AI can be harnessed in the future.
Everyone has their beliefs. Mine don't necessarily align with it.
So aside from Geoffrey Hinton, the general discussion of superintelligence, do you believe this is coming as widely predicted by some AI scientists? And if so, what would be the impact?
I don't believe it's coming, at least not in the next 100 years. So it is a possibility, but a very tiny possibility. So I'm not necessarily worried about it in any other way. People have different beliefs. People have different agendas. Some people are loud about them. Some people aren't. So that's just what I'll say on the matter.
There are so many incredibly intelligent people who are versed in the AI space who have what appears to be a very urgent and visceral fear about this. Why do you think, someone as educated and as experienced as yourself, you're not concerned and you see it, I guess, mostly as a tool, and you say, if there's anything that might happen, it's 100 years from now. Why do you think such educated and experienced people in the space of AI, not all, obviously, but some prominent, very relevant people, have such a real fear? Where do you think that comes from?
You could say the same thing about electricity. When electricity was first invented, being used in different cities, people are publishing papers about electricity killing off people broadly. So I think it's the same kind of instinctual fear you get to any novel technology. AI isn't really anything too special in that regard. I think I would just say, just look at people's, again, knowledge of AI. I don't know who you're specifically referring to, but take a look at it if they've actually worked in the field before. Geoffrey Hinton, obviously not one of those. But I would also look at their agendas and what do they gain to benefit from voicing these fears so loudly and so authoritatively, I would say.
Okay, so when the Terminator robots come, we will have you, sir, to point to. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I really thank you for joining us. This has been incredibly educational. I feel like there's so much to unpack. I feel like if there is a young budding doctor or AI engineer who is thinking, man, they're such disparate disciplines. How can I attack them both? You are kind of like a beacon, like a shining light of kind of, showing them a potential path. So I'm really happy you joined us. What's coming next at Hugging Face? Can you give us a preview as to what's coming in the next maybe 12 months?
At least in my case, I'm open sourcing a bunch of code related to serving different AI models at different hospitals. That's coming, I think, tomorrow. I'm also doing some open source wearables. So you see like these $300, $400 wearables like the Aura and the Apple Watch, but you don't actually know what they're doing with that data of yours. So we're actually releasing a bunch of tutorials and actually building your own wearable for about $30 and actually recreating some of these features. So sleep detection, heart rate reading, anything you can think of that these wearables already do, doing so yourself, fully open source and fully private.
Dr. Cyril Zakka, thank you so much for joining us. And you can check out previous episodes of the 100-Year Podcast at 100year.com and check out our newsletter, which covers much of what we cover here, but I would say maybe in greater detail and maybe along different lines at Substack, which is 100year.substack.com. Again, thank you, Dr. Cyril Zakka, and we will see you guys next time.